Hi, folks. We're back. Thank you for joining me for this show dedicated to our government, how it works, and the people involved in its operation. In the new year, I'm pleased to have Vincent Candelora, who since 2007 has been in the House of Representatives representing the 86th District, which represents North Branford, Northford, Wallingford, Durham,
Guilford.
and Guilford. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate this. Tell me briefly about you've been doing this a while. People know you, but why don't you just tell me briefly about you before we get going?
Yeah, I mean, right now, I live in North Branford with my 3 kids and my wife, and I've been serving for 14 years in the legislature. Right now, I'm the deputy leader in the House, and I'm screening chair, so I get to read all the bills that come to the House floor, and I sort of act as the air traffic controller, working with the Democrat side of the aisle and
Their leadership.
figuring out what bills can be run at what time and what issues are controversial, what bills we can work out and try to negotiate and fix and
Versus what may take a lot more time.
exactly. So I kind of manage the schedule.
Wow, that's a remarkable thing to be able to do.
It's interesting.
Yeah, we're in a new short session, a lot of old woes though. Why don't you tell us what a short session is?
Yeah, so right now the short session is 13 weeks, and it always comes in the even year. The odd year is a 16-week session. The odd year is when we put together our 2-year budget. The short session is supposed to be reserved primarily for budget tinkering. So if we have a deficit, if we need to move money around, you do that in the short session. Over the years, I've kind of watched the short session turns into the long session. So you start seeing issues coming up that aren't dealing with the budget, but are dealing with sort of policy issues that really shouldn't be taken up, but they are. And so the committees are able to raise the bills in the short session as opposed to individual legislators in the long session. I could propose a bill if I want individually. I cannot do that in a short session.
So how long is a long session, you say?
It's 16 weeks.
What immense type amount of legislation are you expected to plow through in this short session?
Well, we're seeing a lot of the controversial issues getting re-raised in all these committees. I serve on public health, and we had a bill dealing with assisted suicide.
Oh my, okay.
The bill dealing with vaccinations, a bill dealing with pregnancy centers and regulating pregnancy centers. Those bills came up last year, and one of them didn't even get out of committee. So to me, it was kind of crazy. We're raising 3 very controversial bills in a short session on top of all the other bills that were raised. So there's going to be a little bit of a logjam.
Okay, how many bills are we talking about?
I think that committee raised about 80 bills. So to try to go through them, some are simple, but some become more complex. And I think we're going to need to figure out what ones we should dispose of quickly so we're not caught up in a lot of controversy.
You can do the tinkering on the sides and then get into the meat of the issues.
Exactly. Focus on the issues we need to focus on. So
the elephant in the room is the toll situation that we've been talking about for years now. It's off the table. What's happening with the tolls and what discussion, since it is off the table, what discussions are going on up in Hartford as to, okay, well, what's the alternative? What are our choices here?
Yeah.
How do we address the roads and rails issues that we're all familiar with?
Yeah, I mean, the transportation issue, clearly there needs to be an overhaul. I think it needs to be an overhaul in the way the money is spent and not just the amount of money that we need to spend. So any bill that deals with it needs to be comprehensive and address both issues. The toll issue kind of took on a life of its own.
The messaging
it was rough.
Bad.
And I think, what we saw is the governor had originally come out and wanted the tolls on cars, 80 gantries, 50 gantries, a lot of pushback from everybody for a whole host of reasons. And then it shifted to trucks only. And then all of a sudden it went down to 14. So it sort of became like an auction piece of legislation as opposed to policy driven. And so by the time the proposal came to trucks only, nobody believed it was really a sufficient
Right.
transportation proposal.
Right.
At
Then
some,
you have the truckers who also pay exorbitant fees
Right.
to do what they do, and then you're just going to
Pile on.
pile on them. That didn't seem reasonable either.
and it's a little dangerous because you think, well, you have 18-wheelers driving through the state, but you do have a lot of intrastate traffic.
Right.
So I
Which is
heard
a big issue here.
Right. I heard compelling testimony from a mulch company that ships a lot of mulch all over the state of Connecticut. He had estimated it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for his company to do business with those tolls. So that's compelling and it needs to be looked at. I think what's disappointing in the whole process is you always sort of have your dance and where things play out politically, especially an issue like tolls.
Why is that political? Like, when did it become political?
Well,
is it a tax issue? Is that the political
right.
kind of thing? Okay.
And I say in the sense that when I say political, I say it's sort of, there's certain issues that catch wildfire and the public engages.
Well, taxes.
Taxes always. So tolling was something that the public engaged in and pushed back. But at some point, we need to get into a room and sit down, both sides, and work it through.
Because the needs aren't going away.
That's right.
And then, we travel, so you go up to Rhode Island, there's gantries. You go throughout, the rest of the region, there's gantries on the highways. Well, you figure they do it. But in Rhode Island, I know the promises were not kept as far as the revenue it would generate.
Yeah, the revenue fell way short. They're also in litigation over whether truck-only tolls are constitutional.
Right.
So that issue needs to play out. Other states, they don't get the amount of federal revenue that we receive in highway money. And that's
Is it because they toll? Because
Correct.
I remember I had heard last year or the year before that if we put up tolls, then we're sacrificing federal funding, so then that negates the need for a toll?
Correct. It's a wash. So that's why you can't do border tolls. But you can do congestion tolls, meaning if you put a toll in to control traffic patterns, then that's okay. The problem with Connecticut is, as you know, just take 95 for example, if you put a toll in Guilford in order to divert traffic off of the highway, well, Route 1 is just as congested at times.
Well, it'll just be more of a parking lot.
Exactly.
If people traveling from New York to the Cape care to get off the highway in Guilford to avoid a toll, I'm skeptical that would be the case.
Well, and I use it
when I've traveled in New York, I've never gotten off the highway.
No, that's true, and I don't mean it from that purpose. But what I'm saying is that congestion tolling is the only methodology we could put into place.
I see. And those are commuters, like I travel to Westbrook.
Exactly. So that's why we had 50 gantries set up, and that's why the proposal looked like that, because it was an attempt to divert traffic, local traffic, not people driving through the state.
I see.
So it's just a very complicated issue. There is federal money out there, this TIFIA and RIFIA money they talk about, where our state is sort of considered a rural state based on the definitions. We could get very low interest loans from the government in order to use it for transportation. And I think everybody wants to try to tap into those revenue sources. But again, it's how do you do that? Do you do it with tolls or without? And I do think there's a way to do it without tolls.
Okay. I mean, hopefully, the ones in powers that be in Hartford can actually sit down in the room soon and try and figure this out. I mean, the rail situation is also...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our rail actually from New Haven to New York has slowed down over the years. I believe it's about a half hour slower than it was in the 1980s when I was growing up. And we need to put money into that rail line because that is a huge economic engine.
Sure, sure. And I'm not an advocate for this, but I know it's quicker for me to drive from North Branford to Manhattan in my car with traffic than it is to take the train.
Yeah, that's probably about right.
Anyways, vaccines, you just spent a tremendous amount of time in hearings. This is kind of your wheelhouse now. You want to tell us what the the controversy is, what the legislation is, and what the controversy is, and
Yeah, I mean,
especially today with the health problems, health
right,
scares
what
that
we're
we have
seeing with the
going.
coronavirus.
Right.
I mean, it sort of bore out of what we saw in California and New York, where they banned the religious exemption. And it came out of the fact that there's a group of people that are starting to doubt the science of vaccines. And I think part of it came out of the HPV vaccine. When you read about that and how it was developed through the FDA and the shortcuts that were taken, I think it did a lot of damage to the whole
credibility of them.
That's right, across the board. So over the last decade, Connecticut has seen a slow uptick in people exercising a religious exemption in order to avoid getting vaccines for their children. What that means is that children can be enrolled in school with a religious exemption for a vaccine. Connecticut overall, the rates are pretty good.
Yeah, like we have a 97% plus vaccination rate,
Yeah,
don't
it's
we?
about 96
0.8 or
points.
something?
I think it's
Yeah,
0.8.
yeah.
So it's right there. But we want to look at, make sure we're stemming the tide. I served on a working group for 6 months over the summer. And frankly, the bill that was put out for a public hearing was not the bill that the working group had developed. It was a very draconian bill that basically said if you're not vaccinated by September 1st, 2020, you cannot enroll your child in school.
Well, 2020, okay.
So that would be
then-
this coming fall.
So this coming fall, then you cannot
So
enter public
essentially,
school.
that's an impossible deadline to meet. So
Right.
to me, it was kind of mean-spirited. It created a lot of panic for people, and we saw a lot of controversy. In my 14 years, I've never seen so many people up at the Capitol. We had, I think, over 3,000 pieces of testimony submitted, and we broke a record. We had a 22-hour public hearing that I sat through that started at 10 a.m. and went all the way to 8 a.m. the next morning.
Oh, wow.
And I have to say, I wasn't that tired because it was very
Engaging.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's intense, and the issues are interesting. You're dealing with religious liberties, the right to a public education, parental choice, and then the overall public need to provide
The greater
public
good,
health.
For the greater good, right.
Right. And so the bill was voted out of committee. It was a vote of 14 to 11. Very controversial. That took all day to
14
vote.
and 11. So voted out of committee means what, though? So you're saying...
So the bill was moved on. The committee approved it with some amendments, and it's now on the House floor. And I'm trying to work with Democrat leadership to improve the bill, but I'm just not sure where it will end up in the end. The sticking point is, at what point do you continue to mandate? Should HPV be excluded so that can never be mandated, that vaccine, in order to go to
HPV
school?
is different also because it's not communicable, correct?
Exactly. And so the debate is, should we just be focusing on the communicable diseases?
Which puts other kids with autoimmune issues at risk.
Correct.
Versus the non-communicable vaccines, which don't.
Right. The other interesting issue that we heard a lot about is, the CDC, the federal government that drives this, only recognizes vaccines for exemptions for medical for very limited circumstances. You have to be receiving chemotherapy or have anaphylactic shock experienced from a vaccine. So children that have autoimmune disorders, have significant food allergies, technically aren't exempt from vaccines.
Oh.
So a lot of parents have been exercising a religious exemption. So they're not necessarily anti-vaccine. There are other children may be vaccinated, but they
But
don't.
they need the ability to utilize that in order to not use one or two vaccines out of the set of vaccines that
Correct.
are offered.
And
So isn't that such a small percentage of the population we're talking about, that this anti-vax, the anti-vax population is small, right?
Yeah,
Then you're talking about a small percentage of that percentage.
Correct. So the people we're talking about, out of 530,000 children in school, you're probably talking about 3,000 children. So it's a very, very small percentage. And my concern is that the law that is being passed is is discarding those children and preventing them from going to school. So we're trying to create legislation that won't cause that to happen. Sounds easy, but it's not.
Right, right. Well, from this perspective, it all sounds a lot easier than it really is.
Right.
Because we were in session, listening to hearings for 22 hours.
Yeah.
So then do you have more hearings when something hits the floor? Is it just for a vote or is it for more testimony as
No.
well?
So once a bill is voted out of committee,
That's where the testimony is?
the committee hears all the testimony, it gets voted out of committee, and then it will go to the House floor. Part of my job as the screening chair is, for instance, this bill was in public health. It has elements of educational issues. So do we refer it to the education committee for them to look at it? We can do that. They don't have a hearing. They would just have a straight up or down vote on the bill, or they'll amend the bill. Ultimately, though, when it comes to the House floor, that's when we will debate it. And that's where you'll hear the terms filibuster, or when we're up there till midnight discussing a bill because we're debating maybe a controversial bill that's gotten raised, and everybody is entitled to speak on it.
I see.
So the House is, it's fun because you have 151 people in the room, and each one of them has a different perspective.
Okay. And is that when the bills can also be made more palatable, or it's in committee that they're made more palatable, ideally?
Both. So
Okay.
you can amend a bill in committee, or you can amend a bill on the House floor.
Okay.
And so right now, because the bill is out of the committee and it's on the House floor, we are negotiating with each other and drafting amendments and sharing them with each other and saying,
Just to see how this works.
can we make everybody happy? Could we
Right.
get to...
Or a majority happy.
Right. And, 76 votes passes a bill.
Yeah.
You like to get as close to 151 as you can.
Sure.
So most issues we try to do that.
Okay, so now we're talking about healthcare. Can you discuss the public option discussion that's going on?
I mean, so tomorrow, actually, there's a public hearing in the insurance committee discussing a sort of public option type of insurance.
Which is important. Right now somebody could watch this show 5 years from now. So right now we have, concerns of a coronavirus epidemic globally, and access to healthcare is a part of that discussion, a part of that concern. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Connecticut is in pretty good shape in that I think we're up in the high 90s for people that have health insurance, whether it be through the state programs or through private insurance.
I didn't realize it was that high.
It is, yeah. We do a pretty good job. The proposal that we are looking at is sort of affordability, especially for the small business owners. And this type of proposal would be, a government-run type of insurance program that small businesses, certain trade associations could get into.
And offset their costs, for the health coverage, correct? Okay.
By getting into a larger pool.
So like unions, unions get into the largest pool possible to offset their costs. This would add to that, I presume.
Yeah, it would
Or
be,
add more groups, is that it?
it would be more groups, like, different
small businesses, you're saying.
different retail associations, your realtors.
Would it be like a chamber thing also? Could a chamber?
Similar to what the chamber
Okay.
offers. Same kind of structure. But the difference is the current programs that are out there are all private models. So when the chamber pools and offers healthcare, chambers of commerce, that's through a private insurance company,
Provider,
like a Cigna or an Aetna. Or this program would be an insurance program that is run and insured through the government. So the government is sort of handling the claims and acting as the administrator.
Can the government then negotiate prices, for medications and what coverage, what coverage prices they'll, you follow what I'm saying?
So eventually it could get to that, and
Yeah.
I think right now I don't think the bill that we're going to see is going to be that extreme.
Okay.
Especially again, we're in a shorter session, but being the insurance
Right.
capital of the world, we don't want to discourage our private insurance companies. So I think there's a concerted effort by the chairs of the insurance company to engage them in the process, which is important before we move forward on it. It's not something I've ever been optimistic about or have supported because I don't think it's cost effective the way the model is set up.
Okay.
But we'll see.
Would the ability to negotiate make it more cost effective, or I mean?
It could. I think there's some other ideas out there that you'll also see out of the insurance company, our committee. There's a reinsurance bill which allows for sort of a separate pot of money to pay down on catastrophic claims.
A supplemental in a way.
If you have a small pool of people and one of your employees gets cancer,
right,
and that jacks up your premiums, there's an assistance money that comes in through this pool that smooths out your premium.
That kind of reacts to those trigger anomalies, right?
So that might be a sort of, it keeps the private insurance intact, and it helps subsidize and deflate it. And so that's a similar bill that will compete with the public option bill.
And it makes it easier for business to carry health coverage, and it makes it more easier for business to do its thing also when it comes to not reserving all this cash for health coverage.
Well, right, and big picture, it helps for employment, because if you're going to hire a 16-year-old versus a 70-year-old,
right,
the 16-year-old is going to be much cheaper. And so looking at solutions to smooth out those premiums, make sure that your age is sort of not taken into consideration.
And it makes people more mobile also. Maybe middle-aged people stay at the same job because of the healthcare, but this would make them perhaps be able to move on to somebody that would not look at their age, as you're saying, as a risk. Well, that's good. That's interesting. Marijuana. Marijuana is still on the table.
It's quite amazing, but not surprising to me that I guess I'm more amazed that we saw this bill get raised in the short session as well, because it did not have the votes to get through the House last year. I have been told it was anywhere from 25 to 40 votes short, which is significant, because that would mean out of 151 reps, you had almost 100 that didn't support it.
Right.
And I think the reason is, as we look at the health issues associated with marijuana and the studies are coming out, it's not appealing for people to do. Colorado, they have a rise in homelessness, unemployment, driving fatalities. Massachusetts is already seeing an uptick in fatalities from marijuana. Connecticut actually leads.
Well, people on overdose, so then they're driving high.
They're driving high.
Okay.
Right. In Connecticut, we lead the country in driving fatalities. And marijuana is one of the high drugs on that list. So, I'm more concerned of the commercialization efforts. So it's sort of amazing in the Capitol, seeing the millions of dollars being flooded into the lobbying effort to legalize. And this isn't sort of the libertarian argument of grow it in my home. This is a full-on commercial enterprise that sees an opportunity to make money.
Sure.
And it's just like big tobacco all over again. The big issue right now is, as we're fighting this vape epidemic, the governor is proposing banning all the flavors of vape.
Which they did in New York.
That's right.
I don't know, did Massachusetts did it as well?
Massachusetts had an outright ban altogether.
Of vaping products,
Of vaping products.
Okay.
But, we're concerned about, it appeals to children, so these flavors need to go.
Flavored like cotton candy, yeah, duh.
Right. But at the same time, we're bringing in a commercial market that sells, gummy bears that are laced with THC, sodas, candy, baked goods. The vape product of the THC has an 85% level. So to put in perspective, when we were kids, the marijuana levels were at about 3% THC.
Now it's engineered.
Now it's 85%. And the danger is that THC vape products are undetectable. So kids can smoke them in the bathrooms, they could smoke them on the bus, they could smoke it in the classroom, and you're not going to smell it. It's a great delivery model, if you want to do it illicitly. But the problem with that is, it causes it impacts the brain development.
The developing brain, right.
So if you're going to do it, it should be at the age of 26 or older, so you avoid that permanent impact to the brain, is what science is telling us. So there's just a lot of hurdles.
Wow.
That to me makes no sense that any state should be legalizing it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I actually support looking at a homegrown model. Let people grow it in their homes and smoke it, because then you're not seeing these science experiments that's creating a very dangerous drug.
And all the marketing is, you're saying gummy bears, candy, soda,
right.
all this stuff, then that's all off the table.
That's right. And you're back to your weed from the 1970s.
Right. And then, another part of that discussion is, all the people that have been arrested and convicted of, drug offenses, low-level drug offenses, which now, then the state's profiting from the same thing. So then how do you discuss expungement?
So, overall, I think, frankly, that argument was brought in to try to justify legalization of marijuana.
Oh, I see.
We decriminalized small possession of marijuana back in 2011.
Okay.
And in the research that I had done, there was nobody doing jail time for a possession offense of marijuana. What we found was people would have a felony offense, but it was tied to something else, like armed robbery.
I see.
And they found pot on them as well.
So that added to it, but that was not why they were in jail.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a lot of those charges were pled out. So the issue of expungement, sure, we should look at giving people a second chance, but it really is being used to try to get people to support the legalization of the drug.
Mm-hmm. And the profiteering of it.
Right.
And along, the same kind of lines as gambling also is on the table up there, for a lot of the same motives, right? Because money to be had.
So Connecticut's in a unique position, and people ask, why haven't you passed sports gambling yet?
And whatever happened to Wethersfield? It came to mind. Like, weren't they building a casino up there?
East Windsor, I think it was.
East Windsor, okay.
That is in litigation, and it's probably going to fall apart. The casino model is dwindling. I mean, even the MGM up in Springfield, Mass. is not doing what they thought it would do.
The market is saturated.
People are moving to online gaming and sports betting, and it is something Connecticut should be looking at. We're leaving a lot of money on the table.
We do Keno now, right?
We do Keno.
That's not online, though.
No.
Or is that online?
I don't know. It's through a TV.
Luckily.
So the issue, though, with Keno, so we have a tribal compact. So the tribes monopolize anything that smells like gambling. And so for Keno, for instance, they said, the state, you can't do Keno. We own it. Give us 25% of the revenue, and then we'll let you do Keno. That's why gaming is also tied up, because they're saying, we want all of the online gaming.
Okay, so I'm being told we have to wrap it up. And, Mr. Candelora and I were discussing whether we should do an hour show or a half-hour show. We went with a half-an-hour show. This will be continued. We're going to do this, on a monthly basis, at least. Hopefully there's so much to talk about, and it's very interesting. In our next show, can we talk about the high school? Can we talk about the police station? Can we talk about Regional Water Authority? The land they own?
We could probably, do another 3 shows on all those topics.
Seriously, right. It's so fascinating. In the meantime, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks
I
for
appreciate it. This is fantastic. You're great to speak with, great to talk to. My name is Dan Armin. I would appreciate everybody looking up old shows on YouTube, on Tutucket TV. Go to videos, and you can find what we've done in the past. We're back on it. We're going to be doing more shows this year. I'm excited about that. So in the meantime, thank you for joining me for I Want to Know, and we'll see you next time.